Hi, I'm Paul Yurick, and you're listening to Got Spice with Greg and Kirti.
But for this podcast, we do have a wonderful guest.
Yes, we do.
That we'd love, you to introduce yourself.
My name is Paul Yurick. I started a company called The Future Party. I've been living in Los Angeles for 13 years. Through that time, I've gotten to work in various industries, film, music, and I've gotten to create a startup. And so
Future Party. Mm-hmm. What is it?
Sure.
Is it kind of like a present party, but you dream about the future?
Yeah.
It's in the Web3.
We call it a community-based media brand.
Okay.
And so we started by throwing events for our community to bring them together, creating thought leadership and helping people out. And where we are now is more of a media brand, creating stories on different platforms to do the same thing, empower the entertainment professional, but also we tell stories for brands as well.
You've been here for 13 years. Have you ever gone to the Viper Room?
Of course.
Yeah. What's it? So is it? I hear it's different now than it was back in the day and everything. So any fun stories or just what's the vibe?
No. Sadly, it's like saying is Whiskey a Go-Go still cool? You know, like the people I know that play the Viper Room, and I'm sorry if you're a friend of mine who played the Viper Room, but it's like the beginning stages of touring where maybe you'll get 20, 30 people in a room and you can play. It's kind of like washed up.
So it's not like Mercury Lounge or like...
and it has to do a lot with programming. Have you ever walked by the marquee of the Viper Room or Whiskey a Go-Go and been like, oh, that's a great show. That's a great band. Yeah. Right. That's going to be the Doors 20 years from now. That hasn't happened. And so there are a lot of other wonderful venues in Los Angeles to explore. I mean, it's great that it's still standing, but it's
on its last legs.
Yeah. So I was just reading an article. I think it might have been the guys from Motley Crue, like Nikki Sixx or someone like that. And those guys, when you look at images of their current shows, they're still a little stuck in the past with their attire. But I was reading and they were talking about the Rainbow Room. And it says basically the same people, the same vibe. No one has actually moved out of the 80s
but
from
see, the Rainbow Room is kind of cool because
it's
it's like a restaurant vibe.
Oh, yeah.
And so
it's like the Odeon.
You get those people in the community feel. A lot of the people are neighbors. They live in the neighborhoods off Sunset. I used to avoid that place like the plague until I was forced to work off Sunset Boulevard. So,
on the street?
Unfortunately, it depends on how you look at it. My office was in a building off the street, but I wasn't on the street. I'm thinking now, actually, I was running around the street a lot.
But so the music scene is kind of hit or miss?
No. The music scene is great.
Okay.
It's just where to look. I think there's a lot of great showcases for young artists. You have School Night and you have a lot of these showcases that happen weekly. School Nights at Bardot on Monday nights. And, Billie Eilish has played there. And so many awesome, where you look back and you go, oh, they recognize great talent. And the way I see it too is when you're a new artist and you're climbing, School Night's the place to show up for the labels, right? That's the place. You don't want to play it too soon. You don't want to play it too late. You need to play it just right, right? It's one of those.
How does someone figure out the just right?
I think anything, momentum, right? I think understanding the conversations you're having professionally. And, a lot of artists go out there and, rightfully so, they just do their thing, put out the art. But there, more times than ever, there needs to be strategy behind it because there's so much. I think it's just like making a movie. You look at how do indie movies get made and and you look at the packaging and the timing of the budget and get the cast and get the financing and then get the distribution and it snowballs. And I kind of look at it the same way. It's just different recipe.
So what role do you play, I guess, in terms of maybe some of these emerging artists? Does your company help them in some way, or
a band is really a brand, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And when you get signed to a label, I look at labels as a venture capitalist that's investing into that product.
Right.
And so back, when I was in my days of being in original bands, we used to look at the whole thing, as you're just saying, what is the look? What is the lighting of the show? Style of music? what are the haircuts? But then we also used to burn incense. So when people would come to our show, they'd leave like with this multi-sensory experience and always make it memorable. And so as Kirti, just like asking you like that whole kind of process and you and your business, and we'd love to learn kind of more about that.
Side note, I went to a really cool show, multi-sensory show that Karen O and Danger Mouse put on right before the pandemic happened for their collab. If you haven't heard the album, do it. It's incredible. And they did a whole multi-sensory experience, and they created a scent. So you would walk in there and they created candles out of it, and it was a whole thing, and I'll never forget it. And
it's a
Scent
mnemonic.
is a huge factor.
So to answer your question, I guess start from the beginning. You know, I moved out here to chase the American dream, so to speak, which we kind of look at as the Hollywood dream.
Where did you move here from?
South Florida.
Oh, another Floridian.
Yes.
There's nothing for me there. But my parents were gracious enough to allow me to make the jump when I was 18 and come out here. And I went to film school, and I was studying and wanted to be in movies. And I think at the time, the only person people knew was Steven Spielberg. So they're like, oh, you're going to be that person. I'm like, maybe. And I always tell people, it's like your dreams shatter when you come to LA. It's like you go here, you go to this famous place, and you're like, oh, that's it. Like the Viper Room, you're like, oh, that's it. And it happens over and over and over again until you find the beauty in LA. You spent enough time here, you're like, oh, that's what makes it so special, right? I came here and I was working as an intern and then as an assistant, wearing a suit every day, reading like 3 scripts a day, you know, rolling calls, hopefully not hanging up on famous directors, trying to patch them. There's a lot of pressure. And I fortunately was, and I feel like it's a gift that I've always had, was to be able to make friends with people who are older than me.
So you have an old soul.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. In college, we were throwing parties, which I went to like a private Christian school. And parties and drinking was not allowed. And so they didn't like it very much. We were throwing parties at the House of Blues in downtown Disney, and the bar was open, but technically no one was drinking, right? And so they didn't like us very much, but we had these things called the Taculars, and we were doing it to raise money for our short films. And honestly, my business partner at the time, now Boye, he wasn't at the time, was throwing these events. And I was just like, oh, these kids seem cool. Like, I want to get in with them. And so I was like, hey, how can I help? And he's like, do you have a credit card? Like, I'm like, sure. I'm 18. I have a credit card here. We were throwing these parties, and then we moved into the professional landscape of being in entertainment. And we were like, how do we do this, you know, to bring people together, make it a little bit more meaningful, and do this in a professional setting. And so we would do house parties and get a few brands to like provide the bar, and then we would curate the whole guest list. And the whole time we were there, it was like, oh, this person needs to meet this person, and this person needs to meet this person. We were just making meaningful connections. And my internships never knew what to do with me, because I would always be like, oh, do you know this person? And they'd be like, yeah, I work with them on, you know, the development side. How do you know this person? You're young, you're an intern. Like, how, you know, like I'd go to Sundance because my school let me go there, and I knew all the things, and they would be like, how are you here? You know? And so it was always a fun dynamic. And so we did this for a long time.
So you're like a dot connector.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books, right? He talks about different types of people, and one of them are connectors.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
3. I think it was 3 different types of people.
Yes.
And so we were doing this for a while, and about like 5-6 ragers in, we were like, okay, this is cool, but you know, how do we make this more thought-provoking for people? How do we, you know, do something that feels more meaningful? Yes, you're making connections, but people are just leaving drunk. Right. So we started doing panels, right? Let's bring these people, let's talk about what we know. And at the time it was film. So we started doing these fireside chats, and those grew. We were doing events, and that happened for a while. And to be honest,
all
it was just
pre-pandemic, right?
This is 2012.
Okay, so it's a while ago. Yeah.
We did this for a while, and you know, we were like, should we make this a business? This is taking a lot of our time. We were investing a lot of money into the parties. Parties aren't cheap.
No.
They don't make they don't throw themselves.
Even during panel events, there's cost, right?
We were looking for the economics in it all, but we were chasing our careers, which was making films. My business partners were at agencies. I was at a production company. At the time, the production company I was at was, managing directors, but they were also producing content. They were a very new arm of Vice Media, which was really cool. So we were getting our footing, and through all that, I ended up leaving my job, my comfy job, and producing music videos, commercials, anything I could really get my hands on to pay bills with. And I was living with as little overhead as possible in a little shack in this like small apartment with Boye in Koreatown. And
What was the thing that you gave up most in order to kind of build your, like, to get to where you are?
Ooh, that's a good one. I didn't feel like I was giving up much, but I would say personal space and privacy.
Sure.
I like my quarters were so like where I lived was like a built loft in a closet.
That's kind of like New York City living.
Yeah.
Very much like New York
You
City.
were like in a hostel?
I didn't have a door for like 8 years. I
What?
maybe had a curtain, right?
Oh
We
my
shared
gosh.
a bathroom. It was like
So it's
That
like living in a
happens.
hostel.
tiny, yeah.
Like when, college students
But you know
try
what? As you said, like chasing the American dream, but that's building the way, like
what
the
is
story
the
you
American
just,
dream?
to me, I think the American dream, people can define it all different ways, but I think it's which is why we have this podcast. It's all about fulfillment and finding happiness in your own life. I think that to me is an American dream of how do you find pure happiness? It doesn't have to be wealth. It doesn't have to be, it could be whatever it is to the individual.
Experiences.
Yeah, experiences.
A lot of people look at it and go, "Oh, the American dream is like making it in Hollywood or like doing something, being famous."
So I
Sure.
have a very maybe simple perspective on American dream. It's just one simple word. It's access. But I think the American dream is access. And if you at least have a plan, you have like your head on your shoulders,
And work ethic.
it's about what you create, right?
Sure.
It's not about somebody handing you something.
Yeah.
Back, you were saying, so from South Florida, so like Miami, South Florida?
Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale.
yes,
So
I
big
The less
music.
cultured
Yeah, but
part of South Florida.
But that Fort Lauderdale and Daytona, that's going to be pretty hot in the next couple of weeks, right? With they're anticipating
Spring
it being
break.
one of the largest spring break areas this year.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Isn't it always?
Well, it used to be back, I think, in the 80s and 90s. Those were like the hot spots. Then it turned to like Cancun.
That's
Then it
right.
was like going to these other spots. But I
Yeah.
think now it's coming back. But
But-
there is a hot music scene. At least
There
there
is.
like the Winter Music Fest used
Yeah.
to take place. Now,
Well,
does
and
that still take
there's
place?
also,
Yeah,
like,
Miami
crypto
Music
land,
Week
right?
is happening this next weekend.
And now
you
it's a
know?
crypto, like
you have Art Basel
even, yeah.
and you have Crypto Week. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you talk to some
So-
people, a
But
lot of
but
friends have
that's-
moved there.
But that's Miami. Like
Right.
that's
Yeah.
like the cool part of
Right.
Florida, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the one everyone talks about.
Yes. It's not like everyone's migrating to, but like St. Pete or something or
Yeah.
Tampa.
I got out of there. I was like, I can't drive a boat for the rest of my life. I was
No.
so I was living in this small apartment in Koreatown and I was taking all these jobs. And then one job, I had taken for this guy. His name was Gary Morella, and he's awesome. He became a mentor of mine for years, and he's still a very close personal friend and someone I look up to. And he had been in the music industry for like 20 plus years. And we were doing some music videos. He was breaking some artists. And then I was like, hey, man, like there's no money in this. I got to take real jobs. And then he called me one day and was like, hey, I've kind of switched around my business. I'm managing Timbaland. And I want you to come into the studio with Jack and Jack, and you're young and cool, and will you come in? And so I was like, yeah, sure. And one day it turned into a week, and out of that experience, everybody hired me for a second job out of the room. I became close with everybody, and Gary was like, hey, they like you. They're taken to you, and Timbaland likes you. And I learned a lot from that experience. I mean, just as a professional, it really it pushed me to be like very almost A-type, very detail oriented, where I'm a creative and details are not my strong suit. And I almost have to like strategically game my own self even to this day to be like, okay, how do I not screw this up? Right. And so I that was a great season. Learned a lot, got to work with my own personal, on my own personal projects. I was working with Allison Stoner, if you may know from Disney Channel, or Missy Elliott music videos for a while, and she's a friend, and I love her to death. She's so awesome.
Did she work with Mary J. Blige also? Or
Yeah,
just, okay.
yeah. She was in the music videos, and it was a whole thing. And I learned a lot working with her and going through that experience. And then, it came time where the Future Party was just getting to be so busy that I couldn't justify having another job. And that came right around the pandemic. We got bought in 2018 by an experiential agency called NVE Experience Agency, and they do a lot of experiences for big brands like Disney and Hulu and Amazon and Apple TV and all these. They're very behind the scenes. We learned a lot, and we adopted a lot of like the agency style. So a lot of with agencies, a lot of type A's, a lot of detail, a lot of professionalism. And you go from like throwing house parties to going through an agency. It's a very big change, right?
Well, it's like a different operating model, right?
100%. And I do believe, when the pandemic happened and we were all going and shutting down and people were losing their job, I was like gaining healthcare. Right? Like I was like, oh, my job this thing that I've been building for years is finally kind of like the net that's catching me.
Yeah, that's great.
Right. Yeah. And it was kind of a cool feeling.
But do you think you would have been okay if you stayed on the music producing side?
Yes. Yeah, because they ended up doing some amazing things.
Right? Like, because music really, the production of new music flourished quite a bit in a different and unique way, right? Over the pandemic years.
Yeah, they had a whole series on Triller TV that became viral. They have the B Club. They're doing so many amazing things. And Gary is a genius, and he really, I don't know how he does it, but he does it.
He sounds like he's your mentor still.
Yeah, I mean, look, our paths are different, right? And we're very busy people, but I've learned a lot from him through the years, and he was someone who always looked out for me.
And you guys still, even though now you're obviously no longer with that organization, but with Future Party and what you're doing, do you still work together with Gary at all for anything
like crossover?
Crossover.
Not
at all?
yet, but I'm hopeful maybe sometime. Like we always keep each other up to date.
How important, and that's because I have a view on this, are people that may have had, like a Gary, like experiences and established credibility. How important are they to informing your success? For me, I have a perspective on this. I think people are everything, and relationship building is core to creating opportunities for not only yourself, but for others. I wouldn't have been where I am today if I didn't have great mentors or people guiding me.
Sure.
Like, and that's the lookout for me today. And these will be like a boss from like 20 years ago or even 7 years ago. And they're like still there for me.
I moved from home at 18, and there were a lot of lessons I realized I hadn't learned. Right. I do come from, a broken family, and my mom is happily remarried and things like that. But there were a lot of gaps. And I think, I didn't have a lot of room to make mistakes. And if I did, they'd have big ramifications.
Sure.
I have to say, like when I was in my early 30s, which you are as well, I had all this experience between working in the entertainment industry, but then I shifted to, I'm going to focus now on being corporate Kirti, and I joined the banking industry, and it's totally different culturally. I entered this world and I had to go through EQ courses at my company because they said I was too passionate about expressing my excitement as and I'm a brand marketer by training. So I was excited about the big advertising idea. Shouldn't I be?
So they wanted to temper you. Yeah, they wanted to.
So I had to learn to augment and maybe play down or play up.
To become an insipid individual.
This
is a good marketing.
I don't think
this is a good marketing idea. We should do this.
You need to be soulless. You need to fire the people you need to fire and get the job done.
So social equity, and you've now built this brand, but so now what you're doing is essentially helping brands tell their stories, it sounds like, in the marketplace, and then activating them experientially.
Yeah, and connect with culture. I think that's really where we shine, right? The Future Party went from throwing events for the community to connect the community. We still do that, and we connect people online, and we have great thought leadership. Around the time when we got bought, we started a newsletter, and we wanted to take a lot of thought leadership that was happening, and we were like, why are people sharing this? And it's the conclusion is, hey, they want to be educated. They want to be in the upfront of culture to know what's happening to inform them on how to do their jobs and what's on around the corner. And so we saw a big gap in the market for that. And so we started a newsletter, and it started monthly, then bi-weekly, and then weekly. And I think through it, we actually learned how hard it was to grow an audience like that. And
is the newsletter like a combination of variety meets BizBash?
not as experiential focus. I'd say it's more like the Morning Brew meets Complex.
Oh, okay.
So,
that's cool.
we talk about the business of culture.
Do you guys have like a podcast or a program?
We still look at ourselves as kind of a startup, you know, and you know what they say, it's all about focus. And so I think our goal is to grow the newsletter really as big as we can get. And then we can go and tell stories on different mediums. But I think for us, it's really about like creating platforms to identify the people and the really smart creators and thought leaders in our community and give them a platform to like share. I think that's where the value comes.
You would say your primary focus is a creator community?
Our primary focus is telling stories and content, right? As a media brand. And then it's always with our community in mind.
I guess what's your perspective on the latest banter is around the de-influencer? I think people are getting kind of exhausted of even that phraseology, I would say. And like, how do you define quality creators?
I think it's really like, how serious and dedicated are you, right? Like y'all show up, you travel, we're here in the morning, you're putting the work in. That's what you have to take seriously, right? And then the platform, the audience, the community you build comes with it. And I think like you can't be quick to judge. Everybody has their passions. And I think if you get into a place where you're like, oh yeah, you're a content creator, right? Especially in the world of TikTok, right?
Yes.
But it's like, okay, well, how serious are you about it, right? For us, the challenge is getting brands in this bureaucratic company run by much older people to understand what is cool. And I think what we've been able to do and continue to do is create a platform to where it brings enough confidence to where they say, we may not get this, but we trust you. When the pandemic hit and everybody was doing the online digital thing, the Future Party did tons of thought leader conversations, and we partnered with Billionaire Boys Club to do brand started by Pharrell, and Adidas has a partnership with them now. And you know, we were talking to them, and we did a whole conversation about the stigma of mental health in communities of color. And so I pitched them to do a t-shirt alongside this event. And so all of a sudden in the pandemic, I'm like designing with the head creator at Billionaire Boys Club. We're making a t-shirt and we're throwing our logo on it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this real? And I think that was one of the coolest things that the pandemic had to offer, was like brands had to kind of step back and go, oh no, we can collaborate to make something really great.
They also had to accept that digital is there.
Yeah.
I remember working with fashion brands. I'm dating myself, but back probably late 90s, early 2000s, they wanted nothing to do with anything digital. I remember I'd be in these meetings, they'd be rolling their eyes, and we're print only. We only do print. Print is the only place.
Well,
Joke's on them.
Yeah, joke's on them.
I mean, we don't have to go that far back.
Yeah.
Even the late 2000s, I actually was placed on the Hermes project in grad school, and they did not know how to create email marketing. It was shocking to me.
It's shocking how hard email marketing actually is.
And it is hard. It's an art form.
It is an art form, yeah. A segue into email marketing is a perfect example of building, we'll just call it, community that you own that doesn't sit on another platform. And what I mean by that is where you have, say Facebook, brands spent a lot of time building their communities on Facebook, but then all of a sudden Facebook will change an algorithm. And now that brand is no longer mentioned in someone's feed. You have TikTok, which is now scrutinized by the government. They're trying to figure out, should it be banned? Should it not be banned? They're already taking it off of government devices.
All government employees.
All government employees.
In
that can
Canada
instantly
too.
go away.
And it's going to happen everywhere.
And so when you're reliant on these third-party applications to host your following, it's actually a dangerous position to be in versus building your own lists. And for that first party information, especially with data privacy now becoming not an issue, but going into effect here in the States. It was GDPR overseas. But here, I think the only way you can truly own your community is if it's located on your own platform and you can have that one-to-one direct communication with them.
Yeah. And you just touched on something. It provides its own set of challenges, but I agree, especially with data privacy and Apple and all these platforms that people use for email. It's like, hey, do we even make it into your inbox? Right.
True.
And so media companies, are built off of that. Like you look at Vice, and they still use these platforms, YouTube and all these things, right? Yes, they have, a network now and they're big,
right?
But it took a lot of time, right? And so,
but it's harder for new entrants,
it's
right?
very hard
for new entrants. It's going to be about first party data.
Sure, yeah, of course, and it's the landscape is shifting.
Are you ever challenged with a business that wants to do something that's not authentic to the brand, and you have to go back to them and say, that's not who you are. You can't pretend to be something you're not.
Luckily, we haven't had to deal with that too much because we work with some cool brands, but it's a dance for sure, because there's, as you mentioned, there's tons of egos always involved. Everyone thinks they know what's right. When it comes to my thesis, it's like connecting people is really important, but also how do we just at this point create something together that's meaningful and that we enjoy doing. It's also harder these days with companies who have created policies where you work from home. Like I work from my bedroom every day. I went from being in an office in meetings and to taking meetings 50 feet from my bed. While sometimes it has its perks, I can wear sweats all day, or, I can eat what I want, or whatever it may be. It feels like you're siloed sometimes.
A little lonely.
And when you're communicating with someone across the country on a digital platform, it can be hard to think about how to take people's feelings.
So I have a theory on this. I've had the fortunate opportunity to be obligated to go into the office for the first 22 years of my career. It's only the last 2 years that I've had, I call it the luxury of being able to be remote. So now it's more about prioritizing the things that are important to me, which seemingly there's a lot of things in that first priority, like work stream, like whether it's the actual job, then it's the hobby, then it's our family. And then it's like, I don't want to eat outside food, so I want to make sure I have time to cook or time to work out.
Yeah.
Their cooking's awesome too.
I feel like I wasn't there for my family 5 years ago.
Yeah, and you bring something up. How are you expected to be creative and pump out, unique and fresh ideas when you're sitting in a room with four walls by yourself?
Well, here's the thing. It depends on your profession. It depends on your specific function as well in that profession or industry. But that's why traveling and creating those moments to explore or be with people is really critical.
Yeah.
And you have to be proactive about doing that.
The 5 dimensions of the minds, that's interacting socially with individuals is just as important as food, shelter, and water.
Yeah.
Right.
For the body and our
Right.
soul.
Do you want to share anything about your personal life? Meaning you shared about like your journey.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your love life at all?
Yeah. Well, I'm in a relationship. I've been in one for a year, and that's very new to me. I was a very social person, didn't want to be tied down. So I think it's really fun. And my girlfriend does not work in entertainment, but she's very cultured. And so
essentially, you can be cultured even if you do not work in entertainment.
she has cool parents. Yeah. Balance is really what I've tried to find key, because I think my output of creativity in different sectors, so like whether it's developing a podcast, right? Like during the pandemic, Clubhouse was really big.
Yeah, it was.
And so it actually got me really good with, public speaking, right? And because we had a meeting early on and our team was like, listen, you can't say dumb stuff on there. every word needs to be intentional, because not only are you representing brand, but also like you don't want to look like a fool and people look foolish. And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? You have to, and people are listening to you. You want them to like walk away with something. And so we used Clubhouse in a really cool way where it was like, how do I take it and make it like a radio slate? How do I get all the really interesting people I know who love talking about their fields, whether it's cannabis, whether it's dreaming, lucid sleeping, or whether it's psychedelics, or whether it's film, whether it's music, and just like create shows. And so I had an exercise where I had like 8 shows I was hosting a week of like all different things. So I was just learning all sorts of things for so long. And one of them was a series we were doing with the Sundance Institute called Club Cinema. And
that sounds cool.
We were interviewing directors and actors and producers who had films at Sundance who were coming out. They were coming out in theaters, and that was so fun. And I realized like how much I love talking about movies and cinema. And so,
are you doing anything with Mr. Sundance himself, Robert Redford, at all? Is he involved? Or
no, actually, I love Sundance. Good thing about creating something is like you can take it and do what you want with it. And so we're gonna take it and working with an old colleague who was at Sundance, and we're gonna kind of make it our own,
like a version of it.
I think right now, balance of life is really key for anybody. And I think, for my level of creative output, whether it's crafting an experience or building an activation for a brand or thinking through a thesis, to like making a pod and dissecting a film and coming with thoughtful things to say. On the other side of it is I want to build a film slate. I haven't really said this publicly, but I still love making films. I want to build a film slate. Hopefully, I believe Future Party can fit in that at some point. Things take a long time to develop out.
Yeah.
But
we're not that dissimilar from like the vision standpoint.
Right.
We have an LLC that does brand consulting for startups, and that's called Tico Solutions. And so we kind of function as an outsourced CMO and help you come in and like think about your vision, your infrastructure, your operations. And then we've got Spice, which is our entertainment brand. And then we're going to be launching in the next few months. This is also like, we haven't publicly revealed this, but I make a variety of hot sauces. And so, and it's all about having low sodium, healthy, fresh ingredient made hot sauces with no preservatives.
With the hottest peppers we can get our hands on. Yeah.
But so like variety,
we
do variety from mild, medium to hot, depending on the source of the peppers. And that's going to be another division. So it's about spicing up your life, like literally in your palate.
People always come out here and they're like, oh, I can't find my community, or I can't find that. My advice is like one step at a time. Meet one person at a time, figure out if that person is someone you enjoy being with. And I think everything else flows, because I do feel like a lot of times when people get burnt out here, they are in these industries where it's a lot of fake people, especially throwing experiences for people who have everything. It's like, how do we make the best thing we can? It's at the end of the day, it's like, it's not, but it's about making a unique experience, creating an experience that would change someone's life or give them a story that they will take for years to come. We have agents and execs all through entertainment who are still like, oh, I remember that party you threw in 2015 and they had like the Bumble haunted arcade and like all these things. It was like one of the best parties I've ever been to. I'm like, see, it's like those moments.
Those moments.
I was just listening to a pod on the way here about how, Hidden Brain. Have you ever heard of Hidden Brain? It's great. And they were talking about experiences versus tangible items and the different types of happiness that it brings you. And I think just like balance in my life is ultimately like really how I can stay creative, right?
Yeah. It's so funny. We were talking to someone yesterday where like some people peak in high school. I think we peaked in our 30s to 40s, and it's okay because we're like discovering new things about ourselves. And one of the big things is like in my 20s, I was like, oh, I got to have that next new bag. I got to have more shoes. I have to have more jewelry. And I don't care about any of that shit. I'd rather go on vacations.
Right. It's funny because they were using just like the the slight differentiation of the nuance between if you're on a trip and it's bad, but you still look at it fondly, or do you get it, you know, like as a personal item you get yourself, or do you get it as a gift, and where the happiness shows up.
Sure.
I find that if I get something as a gift, I cherish it more than just like going and buying it.
Yeah.
Right. You know, or the experiences I think from an early age, I realized just moving to LA was an experience I'll never forget. Right. And it feels like it's been a 13-year like experience, right? And it's still going.
It's an individual's emotional connection with whatever it happens to be, that gift that you received, that experience. And tying back again to your business, as you're working with brands to help them establish emotional connections with their audiences.
Yeah. And with people around them, and learning like be decent people. Like we try and keep like really solid people around us.
Because honestly, it's a little boring alone.
It's so boring.
Life is boring alone.
People will find out, you know.
Yeah.
We are made to be in community with people.
You know, for me, just even, you know, growing up as an athlete playing on team sports, right? And just winning a game or winning a championship, it's exciting to share that with this team that like went, you know, out to battle to fight as hard as you possibly could, and you have trust in each of the players.
Being involved with so many people and throwing events, and like always being that guy who's out, or like out 7 days a week, you know, you have to show up, and like not every day you feel like talking to people.
Not many people really, you know, meet 10 to 100 people a day. Her being a Gemini, it could be like 10 to 100 personalities a day that I'm like introduced to on a regular basis.
Do you have a spin wheel? It's like, which one am I getting today?
One last question before we let you go. Sure. So your business is based here in LA, but I'm assuming you activate across all of
the world. Yeah.
Okay, across the entire world.
If you either want to get into making movies or do experiences or whatever, I don't know, we can chat. As you know, working with brands presents its unique challenges. You know, working with massive companies who have a lot to look at, especially in the age of cancel culture. We could do a whole pod on cancel culture.
Oh my God, yeah.
And it's just difficult to get your voice across. And I think for any brands who are looking to connect to culture and looking to just try something different, have a unique approach, like this is, you know, what we bring to the table outside of just like white labeling an event, which, you know, there's a lot of people who do that and do it well, and we can do that, but we come with a voice, right? I'm heading to South by Southwest tomorrow to do a panel on artificial intelligence in advertising and media, and it's going to be really cool. So, you know, it's
well, if you want, there's some cheat sheet thought leadership that both Greg and I have written on our LinkedIn profile. Mine's called Eat Dirt. His are Tales of Transformation.
I love it.
I've been writing about AI for the last 7 years.
Cool. Yeah. You know, the biggest thing for people to look out to is like ChatGPT is the all the rage these days, but like you could plug in something, and if it doesn't know it, it's just going to pass it off like it does know it, and then give you wrong information.
You should read the thing that I just wrote was it 2 weeks ago? I said my creepy new friend is AI. And it's a whole, I have a perspective on ChatGPT, which could be its own pod.
Enjoyed talking about culture with you guys. I feel that you're two very smart people, and I'm very excited to support you in the forthcoming episodes.
Well, this has been great, Paul. We loved having you. And learned so much about your world. And I think our viewers are going to love that.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for you, but to me, coming back to American Dream, it sounds like you're living the American dream. You've worked hard, and everything is paying off. Your business was recently purchased. Yeah. So now you're part of a larger organization with more resources, and you're able to do larger, I would say probably executions, work with more partners and more brands. I think to me, you're living the American dream.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for being here.